Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Leuven. Welcome to the COSIC course. This is a course with a very long tradition. The first edition was in 1983. I was still on the benches then, studying on the other side of the campus. It's a very intensive program. You're in for a very tough 4 days. What I'll do this morning is give you an overview of the state of the art in cybersecurity, and I'll tell you also something about the course itself. So I prepare this talk every 2 years when we have this course, and I found a very interesting slide yesterday. What CEOs talked about in the first quarter of 2026. That's really what keeps people busy. And I think what is interesting is what is not there. Cybersecurity is not there. Very interestingly, so people worry about geopolitics, about AI, about trade, about the SaaS apocalypse. Well, OpenClaw is there, at least. People worried about LLMs getting access and agents getting access to all your devices. I think if this organization would do a new analysis for Q2, there will probably be cybersecurity there and mythos and fable and all the issues related around this. But I think it's interesting to get to see what's actually at the topic of attention. So this is about cybersecurity, but very often we call it cyber. And in fact, if you look at how the course was called in the past, it was computer security and not cybersecurity. But today we use cyber. So cybernetics is actually a discipline that started during World War II. It was about communication and control systems. It was the idea of building things like machines that would be like living buildings. Living beings, like a bit like robots, okay? And this was mostly also in Eastern Europe. So there is institutes for cybernetics that are still existing there today. I mean, it comes from a Greek word. Kybernetes means actually steersman of a ship. But so in 1982, the term cyberspace was coined. And then in the late 80s, cybersecurity and cyber war, but in fact, people still spoke about information security or IT security or ICT security. Cybersecurity actually only took off when Obama used it in a speech in 2009. Then it really became a popular word. And a few years later, it was widely used. And then people got lazy and they just call it cyber, which is actually a bit strange because cyber just means steering. It doesn't have any connection to systems. But I guess that's interesting to see where terms come from. So this course is mostly about technology, but of course, there is also economic aspects to this, a lot of human factors or psychology, and also some legal and governance. And there will be, in the second half of the course, some people who actually are in charge of real applications. We're talking more about the governance aspect. Also tomorrow, there will be a lecture on legal aspects, and you could easily fill a whole week also just with regulation in cybersecurity. So it's also about technology, which we focus on. We focus a bit less on people because that's not our expertise. But of course, the human factor is also very important. And then processes, and again, as you will hear people who are in charge of real infrastructures, they will tell you more about processes in, I would say, the second half of the course. Maybe one comment on people. There is lots of emphasis on training people to not to do bad things. While I think the real focus should be on designing systems such that if you do make a mistake, the costs are not too high. So I do think really it's this overemphasis on blaming users for everything that goes wrong is actually, we should actually make systems that are much more robust. But of course, if users give away secrets, then of course there is nothing technology can do. That's also clear. So I'll say a few things about trends in IT, then I talk about cybercrime, cyber war, a few words on cryptography, and then some conclusions. So the economy is becoming digital. So I'll give you some numbers because we refer to other numbers later. So the economy, global economy was $117 trillion, and about 15% is digital, depending on the sources. People say 25 or 6, but I guess it depends how you measure. And the growth is 6%, so the digital part is always getting bigger. So the overall growth is something more like 2 to 2.5%. So the digital part is growing more and more. Some other numbers, you can't compare, of course, turnover in investments, But just to give an idea, the AI investments are estimated for this year $2.5 trillion. The whole crypto market cap so cryptocurrencies is $2.2 trillion, but then the value of all gold is $30 trillion. And the value of our stock is more than $100 trillion. Of course, you can't compare values and turnovers, but it gives you an idea of orders of magnitude, and we'll come back to these numbers. Things have gotten very complex. You see here that we used to express things in 100,000 lines of code. I think the space shuttle was 400,000 lines of code. Was high-tech from the 80s. Today, all the systems have tens of millions of lines of code. I think even an app that shows a flashlight has 1 million lines of code. I don't know why, but this is the reality. Well, of course, the economic model is there. But our operating systems are in the order of 50 to 100. A car is already above 100 million lines of code. And with, of course, LLM writing code, I think we'll get more and more code. So systems are incredibly complex, and every line of code has a chance of having a bug, and every bug has a chance of being critical. This means the more code you write, the more bugs you have. This is the paradigm in which you've been functioning. This means that the number of vulnerabilities also keeps going up. There is other complexities. We have something like 20 billion devices on the IoT. And then if you open a chip today, there can be up to 100 billion transistors. So what we're doing is really building incredibly complex systems. So here is the IoT statistic. So in 2010, people said there will be 50 billion devices on the internet by 2020, sorry. And now, as you see in this graph, it's more realistic. So we think that by 2030, it will be something like 40 billion. So by 2020, we never got there. We only got at 11 billion. But at least we've surpassed the moment there is twice as many, I would say, computers on the internet in devices, in cars, in our washing machines, than there are computers in our hands, like our laptops or smartphones. So in total, there is about 30 billion devices on the internet, of which 10 billion are human-controlled and 20 billion are everywhere. So I guess you can find out the IoT has happened if you go buy a new dishwasher or a new washing machine. You can no longer buy one that's not on the internet. And then you can be paranoid like me and say, we will switch it off, the internet connection. Well, then you lose half the functionality. If you actually, the programs you need, or some of them you need, actually can only be available if you connect it to the internet. That's the reality today. So this thing is vulnerable, the IoT. We've seen, for example, drones being hacked. We see medical devices being hacked. Even a long time ago, Dick Cheney didn't want his pacemaker to have a wireless interface because he was worried he would be killed this way. I talked to doctors about this because we also hack medical devices. And they say, well, 1% of medical devices stops working after a few years. So you better keep a wireless connection, otherwise we never find out. So that's your choice once you get such a device. If you switch it on, you may get hacked. If you switch it off, you may not know that the device is broken. We've seen cars being hacked. We've seen the electricity system being hacked in Ukraine. And we've seen IoT devices used as a botnet to bring down internet services. So the IoT is now part of the whole ecosystem. It's large-scale, low-cost devices with limited resources, an enormous attack surface. For some reason, everything on the internet has to get a web interface. Even your dishwasher has a web interface. They're hard to update. Programming is not secure, and typically because people don't have expertise. So it's a complex and fragmented ecosystem. And then if people worry about things, it's very often about safety more. And very often there is a contradiction between security and safety. Sometimes you have to make choices. Of course, an insecure system can be hacked. And if you think of the car of the previous picture, a car that's hacked and controlled remotely is not safe. But on the other hand, you sometimes have to trade off security and safety. For example, if you check every command that's being sent, that for injections of commands, that's of course a safety issue, but it slows things down, and maybe that may slow down your braking. So like you always have to, you can't put a super secure slow mechanism there because then the braking will be too late. So who is responsible? That's a very big problem. Of course, we have safety for cars, and it's very clear who is responsible. If you want to bring a car on the market, then you're responsible. But if it becomes digital, there is a very big fight about this. There is something called, what economists call a market for lemons. which a lemon is a used car that actually looks very shiny, but that breaks down after 10 kilometers, after you take it from the driveway and you paid the $5,000 for it. That's called a lemon in the US. And why? This is also why used cars are so cheap, because the average person can't tell a lemon from a good used car. And the same thing happens in cybersecurity. If you go to the shop or you look online, which webcams are secure and which ones are not. Well, you can't tell. You can bring all of them to our lab and we can work for several weeks and we probably can give you an indication that this one may be more secure, but that's not knowledge that most people have. And then a month later, there is again 10 new models and then you have to do the study again. So in general, we don't know what's secure, so people don't pay for security. Because even if it says secure, you don't know it's secure anyway. So if you're not sure about security, you're not going to pay for it. And then the vendor says, I'm not going to invest in security because people will not pay more for security. And this is how you get actually insecure devices on the market. This was identified by Ross Emerson colleagues already 18 years ago. It's also a tragedy of the commons. The commons in the UK, these are these green fields in the middle of the city. And so the farmers used to put their sheep and cows on there because it was from everybody anyway, until it was a mud pool, right? And the grass was all gone. So this is the same thing on the internet. If we don't secure our devices, maybe other people will be attacked, but that's not our problem, right? So why would we pay more for a secure webcam? How do we care that our webcam is used to hack somebody else? And then lack of regulation, but this has now changed, as we will see. So in fact, this year, the Cyber Resilience Act will go into force. And so there is now regulation for every device with digital component, which is more or less everything. And it's a very complex regulation. Maybe Laura will speak about more tomorrow. But to give you an example of what's coming at you, the Commission said to the standardization bodies, we need 48 standards for IoT devices, and for the CRA Act, you have 18 months. Please go ahead and do it. And these 18 months expire somewhere at the end of this year. You think there will be good standards? People are working very hard. I have all respect for it. I'm going to review some of them, but I think it would have taken 5 years to do good standards. But that's typical response of politicians. They first don't do anything for 20 years, and then you complain enough, and then they do something, but then, oh no, not this. Okay, that's more or less what we're facing. Okay, so I think if we look back 20 years from now, at today we look at something like a Chevy Corvair from the 60s. It's a beautiful car. But then if you look inside, there are no seatbelts, there are no airbags, there is no ABS or all these other three-letter systems that are in your car that forgive you all your mistakes. And if you're in an accident, a metal pin comes from the steering wheel and will put you in your chair forever. So it's actually, in terms of cybersecurity, this is a horror. And I think the current IoT is also a horror. And in 20 years, we will be looking at how could we build such systems? And how could we plug them on the internet? So I hope, this is my hope, that at least in the next decade, we'll do better. So here's this tsunami of regulation I mentioned. I don't have time to explain it, but we asked for regulation I think already in the late 90s, even beginning of this century. We asked for a lot of regulations, but not this, please. So the GDPR was still like something like 40 or 50 pages, 2016. Now, every one of those regulations here is like 150 pages. And they're overlapping. They have conflicting requirements. If there is an incident, you may have to report it to your DPA, to in Belgium, the BIPT, the Telco Institute, the CCB, the Cybersecurity Center for Belgium. It's just going to be very, very complex. There is a separate regulation for the financial sector called DORA. There is a regulation for the certification called CSA. The CRA is for the devices. The DSA is for services. There is also a Data Act. There is an AI Act. The Commission says that maybe we went a bit overboard. We're going to simplify this. And so they've been making simplification proposals. But I mean, if you ask lawyers, first they produce several thousand pages of regulation, and then they say simplify it, then they produce 20% less and say, look, we made it simpler. We solved the problem. So this is what we're facing. There is also lots of policy there and control of society and citizens. We'll discuss this on Thursday. I'll give a talk about what's happening has been happening in ADAS, in chat control, and in now the latest hype is age verification. Now we have to verify age. In fact, this is an excuse for having identification for every internet service. It's going to be very interesting. We also shifted to the cloud. I think there was a generation here that grew up at the cloud. But in fact, when cybersecurity people or cryptographers, we saw the cloud first, we said, are you nuts? Are you going to put all data of everybody in one system? Is that smart? And I guess we know now the answer. It's not smart because the US government has access to this data called the Cloud Act. It's not very smart, and Snowden actually leaked this information. And so this was 2013. And for some reason, now the European Commission is worried, and they have made a sovereignty package. They're now worried that we're no longer in control of our data. But of course, cloud works because of economic reasons. It's much more efficient not to have your own building with your own computers and your own sysadmins, because sysadmins are annoying people. They're expensive, and they have grudges, and they want stuff from you, and they want more budget. So it's all better to have a service in the cloud. It's actually not much cheaper, because once you're in there with all your data, you figure out the bill will go up. And putting data in is very cheap, but getting it out is very expensive. So it's a very interesting business model. But this is where we are. It seems how we build systems. And I do have to admit that clouds are more secure than I thought they ever would be. So there is lots of investment. So the big tech players indeed have put hundreds and hundreds of smart people to make clouds secure. But of course, it's a shared responsibility. Also, if you use a cloud, you also have to configure your site properly. But so as we know, US government has access. And then in the framework of GDPR, there is an agreement between the EU and the US that says that if your data is in the US cloud, it has equivalent protection to your data being in Europe. And it was called Safe Harbor. And then somebody went to the European Court, and the European Court said, no, it's not the same. And the response of the Commission was to make a new agreement called Privacy Shield. And then Mike Schrems went to the European Court, and the European Court said, no, it's not the same. And instead of fixing the problem, the Commission made a new agreement, and it's called now the EU-US Data Privacy Framework. This is an abbreviated title. It's much longer, so people will not remember it. And I can predict that this year, or maybe next year, somebody will win his case or her case in the European Court, and they will say it's not equivalent. So, but this is how we actually play with our fundamental rights. It's a legal carousel in which our rights are violated, but we just keep pretending nothing is happening. We still have the internet advertising system. This is a very old slide, and I don't think people still bother to make similar ones. I don't know. But so probably most of the companies here are gone. But we all think of advertising income for Facebook and Google and Microsoft. So it's like hundreds of billions. So they more or less monetize your data, they profile you, and based on this, they make money, and you get free services like maps or storage or all the other things. But in fact, there is a much more complex ecosystem with, on the left, the advertisers, people who want to sell you fancy things like cars and washing machines. And on the right, there is the publishers. This is today web pages, but also influencers and everybody who has an audience. And so there is not just big tech. There is dozens and dozens of companies that analyze and trade your data. If you're an app developer, if you want to monetize your app, you can actually inject or insert libraries for advertising. And there is like a whole ecosystem of these companies. And in fact, I think they violate GDPR likely. They claim they need to process your data. It's only for their money that they need it. There is no real need to do this. It's just for them that it's needed, but for the rest it's not needed. But you can't even know they exist, and by the time you find out, they've been changed, and so there is no way you can actually enforce your rights with them. So I mentioned vulnerabilities. So this is interesting because it's a graph till 2024, so it's now completely outdated. So you may know, most of you are probably too young to remember, but in 2004, Bill Gates said, well, Microsoft has made a lot of money by selling you products, but they were not secure. We're now going to change things. Security by design, security by default, and security by deployment. 2004. They were really going to improve things. And by the way, Microsoft is now doing the same thing, and they speculate that everybody forgot that they actually promised it to you 22 years ago. So they go out there and they claim this is a new thing for Microsoft, because I guess most people are not around 2004. They don't know that you can just keep repeating things after 22 years. It's like fashion or music or so, I don't know. But so it's not that actually helped. So we always got a couple of thousand, 4,000, 5,000 vulnerabilities every year. And so that means, yeah, on a good day, 10, on a bad day, 20, I guess, Christmas and New Year's Day included. And then actually, in about 5 years ago, it started picking up. So now we're more in the range of 40,000. And I guess this year it will probably go skyrocket. I haven't seen numbers, but it's going to be multiple 100,000s with the LLMs being too good at finding vulnerabilities. So the world is getting very interesting place. These vulnerabilities have consequences. We lose our data. So we have this trend of big data, but actually came together with the cloud, is collect as much data as possible. It turns out that as we collect more data, we lose more data. And this is the bubbles of data losses. It's kind of selective because it only starts with, I think, 100,000 or so. So if it's a smaller breach, you don't even see it. You can go to this website, you can click, you can get the medical data, you can get the government data, you can get private sector, public sector, you can find the reason for the breach. I can tell you only one thing, these bubbles don't get smaller. Maybe this tsunami of regulation will shrink those bubbles, but I think that will take at least 10 years. And I think given what we've seen with the LLMs and the frontier models, I think my prediction is these bubbles will go bigger. And I'll be here in 2 years, the bubbles will be even bigger. More or less, it means that your data is breached several times per year. And if it's just your name and your email address, okay. If it's your name and your email address and your password, tough. But if it's your medical data as well, your financial data, if it's government database of people with security clearances, this also has happened already. It's very worrisome for society because more or less what you're being told by governments, and this is a story since 9/11, since 2001, the attack on the towers, and the terrorist attacks in Europe have enforced this, is that more or less, sorry society, but security is too important, security is a fundamental right, and for this you have to trade off your fundamental right to privacy. That's more or less what I still hear, and this is still the message you hear if you're in debates with law enforcement about this. They say, if you want security, you have to give up your privacy. But of course, if you look at this picture, this is why I like this cartoon so much, it actually shows that privacy is a security property. If you don't have privacy, you can't be secure. If people know when you're going on vacation, actually you have a problem. If people know when you will not be home, you have a problem. If people know where all law enforcement officers are, there is a problem. So in fact, to have security, we need privacy. And privacy is also a collective right. In a society where there is no privacy, you can't have democracy, more or less. This is something you can ask philosophers, but you need actually privacy to have a society that's valuable. So the paradigm or the framing of collective security versus individual privacy is a complete incorrect framing where you always have to give up things. In fact, in a good society, you have collective privacy and collective security. So you saw this happening in security about 25 years ago. So highly simplified, I know the NIST framework is a bit more complex, but more or less the bottom line is you first try to prevent breaches and attacks, and then when you fail, you detect, you respond, and you recover. This is more or less what you do. And what you see since about 25 years is that we have more something like this. Prevention is too hard. It's too expensive. We write so many lines of code. It's actually too hard to actually make things secure. Let's just try to detect problems and then respond and recover. And I lived in the US. So in the US, actually, this paradigm also was the case in finances. So for example, the Americans, they did not want credit cards with chips. They thought this was completely ridiculous. A signature is enough because they watch everybody all the time. And if you misbehave, you go to jail. So in the US, for Europeans, this is hard to believe. people still pay with checks, right? Check. This, I think they disappeared here in the 80s. And how they use them now, they write a check, then they take a photo with their smartphone and send it to the bank. That must be secure. But it's of course insecure. Anybody can get a check from somebody and then you use whatever tool to change the amount and forge a signature on any check. But in the US, the model is we'll watch everybody all the time. And if you misbehave, you go to jail for a very long time. And jail is not very pleasant there. So that's it's a very different philosophy, not try to prevent stuff happening, but try to detect or deter with very big punishments. I hope that maybe in the future this will go back, but this is at least the paradigm where we live today. So the idea is just, well, we have these 30 billion devices. Okay, so if you have a company, you probably have, if you're a bit of a technical company, you have probably 5 times more devices than people. And there is always new devices coming because, of course, also now in a company, if you get a coffee machine, it's on the internet, and your air conditioning system is on the internet, everything is on the internet. So there is like just, and people bring their own devices. So there is in every company of any size, there is 10,000 or 100,000 of devices. So we have to watch everything. Because if you can't see a device, how can it be secure? Which is a very interesting reasoning. You know, you can also just maybe secure the data instead of securing the devices and control how data flows to devices. But the view is we have to see everything. And then, so prevention is hopeless, it's too expensive. It's too hard to build secure systems. We've tried this in the 70s and 80s, and in the 90s still a bit, and we gave up. So the idea is just what you see in the background. You put up these monitoring systems, a SOC it's called today, where you put all your data in there, you put some people in front of screens, and they will watch the whole time for bad behavior. That's how you secure things. This is focused on detection. And then these people, well, they're expensive, so you move them a bit more to the east. And then they're even too expensive, you move them more to the east. And then at some moment, you run out of east because if you keep going, you end up in the west and the people are expensive. So at some moment, you have to stop moving even to the east. So the next thing which you do is actually to use analytics. It used to be called statistics, to analyze the data instead of the people, and now we call it AI. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use AI, and AI will learn what good behavior is and bad behavior is, and more or less you end up with the scoring systems that they have in China, where everybody is being evaluated, and if you don't behave well, you can't buy bus tickets or plane tickets or train tickets. I don't know whether you saw this, I did put it on the slide, but China has this system where if pedestrians cross the street when the light for pedestrians is red, then they get a fine, but also their photo is shown on a huge billboard, like to shame them, like this person crossed with red light. And then what happened was there was a famous CEO, a lady, who won a big award, so she was put on the side of all the buses. Can you see what happened? So the camera saw the bus driving over the intersection when it was red for pedestrians. It took the picture of the lady and showed it, shamed her on the billboard because she officially would have crossed when there was a red light. So this is what's going to happen. We will be punished for things we even didn't do by the AI. But of course, AI is essential to help for cybersecurity. Like antivirus already uses machine learning from the 90s on, and of course now even more. Intrusion detection, as I mentioned, so your SOC, vulnerability detection. So today you actually take your software and you ask an LLM or frontier model, you ask it, can you please find vulnerabilities in there? And even today you can ask it to patch it. And apparently if we have to believe the Anthropics and OpenAI's, this is now happening and it's actually doing it better than real users. I guess there is still some doubts with this, but at least it plays a very important role identifying vulnerabilities and fixing them. Detecting fraud, it's again not new to use AI for this or machine learning. We had a project with Vodafone to detect fraudulent subscriptions, an EU project in '95 already. And later on, this gave rise to a startup that did the same thing for MasterCard in the late 90s. So using machine learning for fraud detection is something not new. This is 30 years old. Detection of phishing, data loss prevention, and even in research, of course, there is many ways you can use AI for your research. But like side channel attacks are a very particular application in cryptography. Of course, how reliable is this all? And as we will see, one of the adversaries are also going to use AI. So unfortunately, the bad guys are also using AI. And so all this data from the data breaches from a few slides ago is being fed to AI, who then send a carefully crafted email to you to actually convince you to do certain things. And the most extreme case I heard of is even a fake Zoom call with all fake people convincing somebody in the financial world to transfer a large amount of money, so kind of business compromise fraud, but it's no longer crappy emails, it's no longer phone calls, it's actually even complete Zoom calls in which there is a whole team of fake people convincing you to do something. So the bad guys use it too. So more or less the message from the last month is that all the stages of MITRE, so MITRE is the attack framework, but goes from reconnaissance till exploitation. I will not discuss all the phases, but like you have to first stake out the system and then try to get in lateral movement, privilege escalation, find vulnerabilities, and so on. All the steps of an attack, more or less, you can automate this. I'll show you some slides about this. Of course, all the misinformation problems. I saw a very interesting talk last Friday of a social scientist who says that most people believe now that they're actually not able to tell real news from fake news. So even if they try. And because of this, they just watch the news that entertains them. That's the response of humans to this. And so this is why, and his answer was, well, the official TV news should be more entertaining because otherwise nobody will watch in a couple of years. So it's a very disturbing development, but this seems to how humans respond to this. Now, of course, I think a large part of websites are made by AI, and our AI is ingesting those websites, and we don't know what's going to happen. Whether, like, you know, the internet will become ever and ever more crappier, if it is still possible. And also, all these LLMs are statistical, so they predict things, but if you give them twice the same input, they give you a different result. So we actually don't know what's going to happen. So very interesting problems. So I think our first response was when we saw AI, well, this is fantastic. No, we can use this for fraud detection in the 90s, machine learning. I mean, AI also is a lot older, right? The term AI is from the 1950s. The first chatbot was in the 1960s. So this is not so new, but of course the real breakthroughs happen something like 15 years ago when first time Google could recognize cats from dogs. Well, in fact, maybe even older breakthrough was beating, I guess it was Kasparov in chess, right? That was a very big breakthrough that you could finally play chess better, and then recognizing cats from dogs, 2012. And then, of course, the breakthrough of ChatGPT a couple of years ago. But so the general attitude is this is fantastic. It's going to make us more secure. And in fact, it's going to help us to have strengthened defenses. So if you went to the big conferences in the last decade, people said, oh, our SOC uses machine learning techniques or AI techniques to detect the bad guys, and it's much better. I think after this spring, people now are worried about destabilization. And so more or less Anthropic said, we have a model that finds so many flaws that, you know, it's going to be a tsunami. We can't even release it. Okay, it's so bad. We're only going to give it in Project Glasswing to 50 companies under controlled circumstances. Some new flaws in Linux were found. Well, it turns out that this flaw had been found before, but at least Mythos recognized that this flaw was also in another variant where the same code has been reused. Firefox had in April 2025, I think, something like 25 vulnerabilities. In April 2026, 423. So this is more or less what we're ahead of. So this is just the beginning. So this curve of 10,000 vulnerabilities, or 10,000s, maybe 100,000s, or even millions. And this will definitely last until all the code that has ever been written in the past with full of bugs has been fixed. And of course, in the long run, it may actually be better because we may be able now to rewrite stuff. So some other marketing stuff is that you can actually take Mythos or Fable and rewrite all your code in a day, which normally you need 10 developers to work on for 6 months or a year. So maybe we're able to afford to rewrite all the code in a much more robust way. So, for example, one of my old students works at Google, and he writes code for Android security in Rust, and he doesn't know Rust. So he writes C++ and some prompts, and then the thing produces Rust, and then it goes to the whole quality control thing, and in the end, this is code running on your Android phone. But he says, I don't know Rust, but I write Rust code for Google. So that's the future, so it's actually very good news. But of course, the question is it going to get better in 2 years, or in 5 years, or in 10 years? And we know, without trying to be dramatic, it's going to get worse in the next year. So my advice is to people, take what's on your bank account and print it down on paper. Okay, not on a computer, so that if something happens to your bank, at least you still can prove that you had some proof that you had some kind of amount of money in your bank. Just an advice, don't have to listen to it, but that's what I would do, given what's coming to us. So the investment is massive. The hype is also massive. So of course we don't know whether this is true because it all comes from ChatGPT, these numbers, but the claim is that at least this year, the investment in the US may be $1.2 trillion, and a large part of this comes actually from big tech. So the venture capital is a lot smaller. It's really big tech making this investment. It means this very funny thing where one company buys stuff at the other company, and so nobody's paying, but a lot of money production is being taken, and we'll see what's going to happen. If you look at the US, it's 40% of global money, China 18, Europe 16, and the rest of the world the rest. But if you look at really core infrastructure research, I think Europe is much farther behind. So if you look at what the European Commission is spending compared to what big tech is spending and US government, there is a factor 100. So I think this is also spending of companies who invest in AI solutions or who buy AI products. So this is not infrastructure and creating models. So there is, of course, a very big concern now with some experts that if you can build an AI that can improve AI and you control that, then you actually will be ahead and nobody can catch up with you. Or at least it's very hard to catch up with such a system. And so people are advocating that Europe should also invest in this. Some other people will say, well, we should just try to do like the Chinese and steal some of the models when the others have paid a lot of money. What DeepSeek did, at least that's what the Americans say. I don't know whether it's true, but that's what the Americans accuse China of. But at least it's a very big shakeup. I mentioned Project Glasswing. So first people thought it was a pure marketing thing for Anthropic, for its IPO, but I think now people actually know that there is, of course, some hyping, but it is a real problem. And then I guess I mentioned here the Firefox number. I gave them already. So this is 423 in April 2026. So Mythos actually not only finds vulnerabilities, but writes exploits. And so this is what is changing the world. In the past, okay, there were a dozen vulnerabilities per day on average, but you could look at them and say, that's never going to be exploited. That's too hard, at least, or in my system, making an exploit for my specific application, that's going to be too hard. So you probably got away with patching only 1 in 50 vulnerabilities or so, and then the rest postponing it. And so now, in fact, the cost to exploit a vulnerability is going down. And so also the time to do it will go down. So soon it will be negative. It's a joke, of course, it can be. But so more or less the time to exploit a vulnerability will go down. And this says days, but in fact now if you read the press releases and the announcements and the blogs, it's more like minutes and seconds. So this is pretty scary stuff. So here is something I really like because there is a lot of hype, okay? There is all these big companies that have access to Mythos that actually make claims, but for us it's very hard to check. So this is the AI Security Institute in the UK. It's a government research lab, and they have kind of capture the flag competitions or tests. And so what you see here is how the AI tools do in function of the number of tokens. So this is, of course, money in practice. And so you see here, for example, Mythos Preview, the latest one. This is from beginning of May. So it manages to more or less cover something like 26 steps instead of needing the previous version couldn't get as far and needed like 100 million tokens. 2 weeks later, in fact, it went down by several orders of magnitude to something like 20 million tokens and got already 2 steps further. So there is no doubt that in the best case, it already gets to the end, which is 32 steps. So this is a challenge where you have access to a network and you have to take it over, more or less, right? This is a complete control of a company. That's the challenge. I find this worrisome, right? This is what's happening. This is what we have ahead of us. And so I think especially this is the improvement of a few months, right? So this curve goes to the left and higher up. And if this keeps moving like this, then you see that for a few dollars, you'll be able to compromise any system. So Mythos was only there for Glasswing, was restricted, and then Anthropic brought out Fable a couple of weeks ago and said, well, Fable is doing better in code development than Opus 4.8 and GPT 5.5. Offense is better than defense, though. It's also good for science, but will actually block things if you ask it questions about cybersecurity. So if you ask it to find vulnerabilities, or if you ask questions to biology or chemistry, like to make biological chemistry weapons, then it will actually fall down to Opus 4.8. And so this is how we have guardrails. And indeed, if you want exploits, for example, Mythos 5, which is actually an evolved system from the preview, which was discussed in April. So Mythos 5 is really substantially better than all the other systems. Again, you have to take it with a grain of salt, but at least this is more or less where we are. And I guess you all know what happened. Somebody said to Fable, they didn't ask, please find me flaws in this code. They just said, I'm the engineer in charge of this code. I want to make it more secure. Please give me some advice how to do this. And that was enough to bypass the frameworks or the protection or the guardrails put on Fable. And the response of the White House was to lock down access to Fable and Mythos. So only US citizens can now have access. And then the G7 said, well, we'll limit the access to everybody outside China, because of course now there is a worry that you're going to be able to attack with modest amounts complete economies. And then the announcement over the weekend was that Anthropic actually took an identity system, because these crazy people in charge of these AI companies. So what happened is that Altman also has a company, the Orb, where you're supposed to give your iris, and in exchange you get some free money, and he wants to build an identification system for the whole world. I mean, the guy's completely nuts, right? I mean, this is kind of, it's a privacy nightmare, but of course, if people are poor enough, they may do it. For $50, they may give away their iris data. And so now, in fact, there's a company called Persona, and so the announcement this weekend was that Persona would be used to identify who was US citizen and not. Because even inside Anthropic, you know, they don't know who's US citizen and who is not, in some sense, right? That's not an asset, what you know. If somebody logs in, that's not attached to your username. There's not a bit set US citizen or US citizen, or not US citizen. So more or less, Anthropic announced that they would actually, from now on, use Persona and use it to decide who inside the company could get access to Mythos and who would not. So another step, we don't need child abusers and we don't need adult sites. We now have more reasons to actually identify everybody on the internet for every service. Really scary stuff. So I think where this is heading, and this is not my slide, this is slide 2019. I think of a guy who has a very good foresight. So of course, attackers will use AI, defenders will use AI. The attacker AI will learn from the defense and improve his AI or her AI. And your AI will also improve. And so it will just keep, what you're going to have is two AIs fighting each other. And as humans, it goes too fast. These things evolve every second. Every time they see a response, they will make a new attack and you make a new defense. So more or less, as a cybersecurity expert, you'll be watching this. It goes too fast for you to follow. Okay? You can only hope that the good ones win. Right? That's what's going to happen. Of course, it's a bit dystopian, but I guess we'll have to harden our systems that we don't end up in a situation, because this means more or less that cybersecurity experts will be out of a job, and that you can, if you have a bit of understanding in security, unless everything is designed secure from scratch, more or less attacking is always easier than defending, right? It's the same thing like you want to secure this building. You have to find all the entrances and the roof and the windows, while actually the attacker only has to find one door where somebody went to the bathroom, and then you can go in if somebody's distracted and looking at their phone instead of paying attention. So that's, I think, the most dystopian thing we should probably avoid. I was actually giving talks about AI in Melbourne. I was traveling for visiting universities, and I took a picture myself of this billboard, which I really like. The machines are learning, but what are we teaching them? And it was advertisement for Salesforce, but I still think that, forget the Salesforce, I think it's actually a very nice question to ask. And so there is a very nice blog post by Scott Aronson, who's actually a physicist working on quantum computing, but he kind of took a sabbatical and he went to OpenAI for a year. And so, in fact, most of, say, NGOs and experts, we're worried about AI dystopia, where this AI will be used to manipulate us even more. Right? We can't distinguish truth from what's not truth. More or less, we put into kind of a virtual world, right? We manipulate the whole time. Some of our work is no longer needed. So but the AI is being used by a handful of people to control the world. That's more or less the dystopian view. And this is something we should fight against. You see this also if you talk to students. Some of them are young generations. If you mention AI, they go like, oh no. Because, of course, they're very worried about their futures, right? Will they still find a job? Will they still be able to build out a life like the previous generations could do? But then also Musk and all the other guys, these crazy billionaires or trillionaires, they also wrote a document saying we're very worried about the future of AI. But in fact, they're worried about alignment. So it's called by some very funny guy, he called it the paperclip ellipse. Paperclip ellipse means that somebody someday tells an AI machine to build paperclips, and this AI machine starts building machines that build paperclips, and building machines that build paperclips, and so more or less it takes the whole world and it turns the whole world, all the resources, into a paperclip building machine, that we end up with the Earth with no more food for humans, but all paperclips piled up everywhere. And so this is the worry of Musk, and Altman, is not that we all will be slaves of them, but that they will not control the world, but that it will be a machine that controls the world. So you should be very careful. We both write letters and we both complain about AI, but in fact we have very different goals. One is worried about people using it, a few people to control the others, and some others feel that even they will not be in charge, and they're very worried about this. I don't feel sorry for them. If they build stuff where they're not in charge, well, they should build it, they should are in a position to actually control it. But it's very interesting, if you read those warnings, those letters, you should really look at the different perspectives, and they claim to be on the same side, and they want to appeal to your emotions that it would be really terrible to have a paperclip ellipse, but I think it's less realistic, and this is actually much more worrisome, but by focusing on this, they make you forget about that. That's, I think, their game. I don't think I have time to discuss too much. You'll get the slides. But I do think it will change cybersecurity. It will change your job, also researchers. You see this, that researchers are increasingly using AI to write papers, to review papers, to do experiments. It's fascinating. I think everybody will have to look for a new place. Also people who write code, develop hardware, software. It's very interesting. But if you're in charge of systems today, well, you're going to see a tsunami of patches and attacks. It will be very interesting how to deal with this. I think life will be interesting in the Chinese sense. So in China, a curse is to say, we hope your life will be interesting. So I think life will be interesting in the next 2 years. The other worry of AI is more this dystopia I mentioned. So the fact that we're controlled everywhere. We're filmed everywhere, our fingerprints are taken, our behavior, our emotions. This is now where AI research is, detecting emotions of people. So more or less, AI will make it possible. This is, I think, more details on this dystopia world. This is, I think, definitely a risk. It's not only protecting our data, but also our metadata. It's enough to know where we are and who we communicate with for AI actually to know a lot about us. And so more or less you have in society, you have users, government and industry, and we have a social contract. So we have capitalism that seems so far has worked reasonably well. I mean, it's a terrible system. It's like democracy, but it's better than everything else so far. But it's getting a bit out of hand. But more or less the idea of capitalism is that government protects citizens and gives them basic rights, like, 40-hour work week and weekends and all these kind of things. There's a social contract. On the other hand, industry gets freedom, and the same thing for our data. So in Europe, we tend to trust government more than industry. In the US, it's the other way around. Given the current president, not so surprising, but okay. So, but in general, what we have is a GDPR model is that the government limits what companies can do with data, but also themselves to protect citizens, and that's part of the social contract, right? You have technology, but you will not abuse it. Just like in all the legal systems, the government cannot just enter your home. They have to have a good reason, and there is exceptions for this. And so the same thing has been transferred to the data world. But of course, industry now has big data, has the IoT, has the advertising ecosystem, has AI. So more or less, it's very valuable. It's much more intrusive than anything we had. I mean, the motivation for privacy laws was databases of direct mail companies who would send folders to your home to make you buy stuff, right? This is kind of a threat model we can only laugh about now, but this was the worries of the 1970s and 80s. We know from Snowden that governments get access to all this data. And so now governments no longer have an incentive for companies to collect less data, because the more data companies collect, the more data governments have. And so Susanna Zuboff has this called surveillance capitalism, where actually you're being exploited, your data is being exploited, you as a human are being exploited, just like humanity has exploited nature to create an economy, and now we're exploiting human beings to create an economy. And of course, I mentioned that privacy is essential for democracy. Privacy is actually power. There are very interesting books if you want to understand more about the connection between data, privacy, and securing our systems. Okay, so up to cybercrime. This was more or less the context of IT, where we are in cybercrime. So of course, the image we had, I would say already in the 80s was hackers. Of course, today hackers used to work for Microsoft and they look like this, and they have companies where they sell pen testing services to you. Of course, organized crime moved in, because once you have money, organized crime follows the money, right? There's no more point in robbing banks, right? There is no more physical money in a bank. Try to find some ATM machine in Leuven, good luck, right? If you need 50 euros in cash, try it. Good luck in Leuven. So the challenge to do this, you go to a bank, they say, oh, we moved our stuff to there. You go there, we closed our stuff today. And there, we actually, our machine is out of order. Like you have to do 4 or 5 machines to get 50 euros. So the organized crime no longer robs banks. They move to the digital world. You have, of course, insiders are a very big concern in some organizations. Nation states moved in. They were always there, but of course they switched and they now use this technology as well. And of course, these 3 actors will not be as visible as hackers. You know, nation states want to remain invisible. Organized crime doesn't want to be visible. Insiders attacks. Then you have activists. They want to be visible. They use digital world to get attention to their causes. And of course, the latest setting is cyber war. More or less, now it's kind of clear in the last 15 years, several militaries have added a cyber component. So even Belgium has now 200 people doing hacking and hopefully also a bit of defense. But if you look at all modern warfare now, there is some hybrid component, which means there is some cyber components. And so even if there is no open war, in fact, the cyberspace is, or the digital aspect is a very easy case where you can do stuff without declaring open war. Back to crime, I mean, I guess I can be very fast. This used to be things we had to explain in the 90s to people coming to this course, but there is something called malware. There is botnets where you hack systems into control. There is phishing where you convince people to click on stuff, which is, by the way, my job, to click on stuff. If you look at my job, half the day I'm clicking on stuff. And phishing is to train you not to click on stuff. It's very, very challenging, actually. I have a very challenging job because I'm phished the whole time, or people who want things from me I have to click on stuff. And then this all came together in ransomware, where you try to use phishing and malware, maybe not botnets, but your phishing and malware to actually get control over a device. You encrypt all the data, use cryptography in a bad way, and then you ask for cryptocurrencies to get paid. So there were 7,000 incidents in 2025, so up by 30%, and this is the reported ones. There is also many that try to stay under the radar, of course. That's what companies try to do first. The payments that have been tracked is about $1 billion. Remember that number? The average cost of an incident is $1 to $5 million, and the ransom payment is 1 to 2. So the cost of an incident is typically a multiple of what you actually pay. Okay, so this is probably the tip of the iceberg. Probably the real incidence is a small factor more. So why is this all so hard? Well, it can only be done remotely, all these attacks. You leave no traces. At least for now, you can be anonymous on the internet, but you can hop from one continent to the other. And if somebody doesn't have logs, then you're fine. It can be done large scale. You can send millions of messages, and the impact can be huge. You can ask for millions, or you can steal the crown jewels of a company. I don't know whether you saw this, but within a week, that announcement of Project Glasswing, somebody announced that they actually got access. They got the API keys to access Mythos. So, right, you say this is the most sensitive thing in the world. Nobody should get access to this. Only 50 companies can do this. And within a week, somebody said, oh, here are the keys. Thank you. So this is the impact, of course. In this case, I guess they found out they could block it, but the impact can be enormous. Of just finding one set of API keys, you get access to a powerful hacking tool. So why haven't we solved this? It's not because researchers and practitioners are incompetent. It's just because very complex problem, not only technical, but also legal. We discussed the economic aspects, the fact that the market doesn't reward this, so you have to create regulation, which makes things more complex. And then also there is the human factors. Some people are also careless and do click on every link you send them. Well, then there is actually not much hope, right, if you, given the current framework. Fraud numbers are hard to get by. The European Central Bank publishes some. They're typically a bit always delayed by several years, but you get some idea. So they said 2024 was $4 billion, with 23% increase. And in fact, if you look at the percentage, it's the largest for card payment, but most of these payments are low volume. So overall, this is a volume in million euros, is actually only less than $1 billion in Europe. This is, by the way, per half year. So in fact, you have to add them up. So you probably end up with something like €1 billion. Credit transfers, the amounts are bigger, but the fraud rates are very low. And so overall, the industry can say we're doing great because our fraud numbers are 0.002%. That's the optimistic perspective. The bad perspective is that you lose €4 billion per year. Okay, that's depending on how you want to look at this. So I guess what industry especially is watching and the central bank is watching is, are these things going up, right? If this seems to be tolerated as the risk of doing business, but if this would go up, there would be a problem. And my prediction is, given Mythos and Fable, if I be here in 2 years, these graphs will actually go up. That's what I predict. Unless, of course, things are tightened, but then it will become impossible to pay. Global numbers are even harder to get by, but a number from 2024 is about $35 billion. So it's a lot of money. You know, you can hire quite some computer scientists and experts for this to get better attacks. And indeed, some states like North Korea, Iran, Russia, they're using this as a source of revenue, right? They actually pay hackers to make money for them, and this is the reason why some of these numbers are so high. Card fraud. This is global card fraud. This is a bit older statistics. So you see overall it's increasing. Percentage is actually not increasing that much. But this is the order of magnitude, a few tens of billions of dollars. Cryptocurrencies, again, there is large thefts. Scam losses are way bigger. So thefts are typically, of course, it's still shocking to have a billion or $2 billion in cryptocurrency stolen. But if you look at the scams where people are convinced to invest in stuff, where they send their cryptocurrencies, and in fact, there is nothing, there is no investment. This is like 150 billion. And then this is cryptocurrencies received by illicit addresses. So this is about something like 5% of cryptocurrencies is actually being used by something called illicit addresses. It doesn't mean it's all crime, but it gives you an idea. E-commerce fraud. I will not go to all the details, but it's hard to get statistics. I couldn't find new ones. These are ones from a couple of years ago. But more or less, e-commerce fraud is also ordering something and then not paying it, or ordering something, claiming you send it back, get a refund, but you never send it back. This is, of course, also e-commerce fraud. And it's very simple. This happens at a large scale, but we all pay for this because, of course, the merchants just increase their prices by the 3%. That it's not only cyber attacks, it's also people abusing the system. Again, the total amount is something like $60 billion at this order of magnitude again. Why do I want to show this? Because people always come up with these amazing numbers for cybersecurity costs and cybercrime costs. So this is a discussion of 10 years ago, even longer. Microsoft said it's $3 trillion. Okay. Around the same time, the company RSA said it's 1.5 trillion. McAfee, antivirus company, said it's 0.6 trillion, 600 billion. Another organization said it's 200 billion. So what are the numbers? Just people make them up, right? You do a study. Whatever study is not very scientific, you come up with some number, and then you make a white paper, and you send it around. You try to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Buy my products because crime is terrible online. That's more or less the model. By the way, at the same time, Cisco said it was like also $500 million. So their estimates are really widely varying. We actually don't know how big cybercrime is. So a high-profile estimate, I still don't know who's really responsible for this, said that in 2025, cybercrime will cost the world $10.5 trillion. Okay? And this is something I found yesterday on the internet. This is the estimate made 3 years ago of the growing cost of cybercrime. So it says it will be, in 2 years' time, $14 trillion. Okay, now we have to go back to the numbers I showed you. Global GDP, $117 trillion. So these people claim that 10% of the whole GDP is cybercrime. The budget by companies spent on IT is $5.5 trillion. So people want to make you believe that the cost of cybercrime is twice the IT budget of the world. Anybody believes that? It's just made up numbers. Okay, nobody actually knows this. But it's definitely not 5 trillion. And by the way, it's interesting if you read all the regulation of the Commission. So these regulations, they always start with a preamble, and the Commission also cites these numbers. And I wrote them a letter to say they should stop citing random numbers with no scientific justification, but they love it so much. And I even went to a discussion with them in a panel, and I tried to convince them to should stop doing this, but it's so cool to say 10 trillion, and it's so important, but it's just nonsense, right? You should be very careful with this. So this is an interesting graph that shows you the cybersecurity market. Okay, so this is about 300 billion. That's for me a reasonable indication how much cybercrime is. It can be at most a small multiple of this. And it would still be very strange, but I would not be surprised that companies don't spend 10% of their IT budget on cybersecurity as they should, and that actually companies rather pay losses than they actually pay in advance. But still, it's not very realistic that the cybersecurity industry has 300 billion industry, and the losses would be 10 trillion. It's just complete nonsense. Okay, it cannot be. So there is actually a very nice paper by Microsoft from 2011 already explaining this, sex, lies, and cybercrime. And they have an explanation why we get those numbers. And this is a phenomenon known in psychology. I'm not a psychology expert, but there is a paper from much earlier that shows that if you ask heterosexual men how many sex partners they had, and then you ask heterosexual women how many sex partners they had, that the numbers, and then you do statistics, that the averages are vastly different. And this is actually not possible. Okay, I'll let you figure that out in the coffee break. Think about it. It's not possible. But so psychologists have figured this out, that it's actually, there is a few people who exaggerate a lot, and that completely messes up these statistics. And this is probably something similar that's happening. So you go interview somebody with a big incident, and then you multiply this by all the companies to which this did not happen, and then you get these kind of things. But okay, very interesting. So governments and industry, of course, are also hacking. So you're made to believe that it's just organized crime doing bad stuff. But in fact, law enforcement admits very openly that today they hack systems and they actually have vulnerabilities. There is also lots of companies that do this. And so it's probably an industry of 10,000 of people trying to find 0 days. And they now see their existence threatened by all these LLMs that can do it automatically. Because you may know that if you find a 0-day for iOS, for Apple, and you get control over an iPhone remotely, you can get from Apple $1 million or $2 million. If you go to the black market, you can probably get 10 million. Okay, that's the reality today. Of course, if Mythos can do this, then it will be terrible for those people who base their income on this. But of course, we know, of course, that there is NSO Group, Celebrite. There is actually hundreds of companies. Also inside in the EU, Hacking Team is very famous. It's an Italian company, and they were hacked. You can find, if you go to Wikipedia, you can find all their customer lists and products. It's fascinating. 47 gigabytes of content of Hacking Team is hacked. They shut down, but apparently they started again because it's so lucrative that they will do it again. But so also our democratic governments fund these companies that if they find a flaw, rather than helping Apple and Google and Microsoft, they actually sell it on the black market or make a tool which they sell for something like $100,000 per use, and it's a very profitable business. If you want to understand more, you should read this book by Nicole Perlman. This is How They Tell Me the World Ends. So she describes how this zero-day ecosystem came into being. So how first a few people realized they could make more money by selling the thing than actually warning the vendors, and how like a whole economy came into being. And of course, this market will be disrupted by LLMs, but still it will still exist, but it will be at a different scale and by different actors. If governments hack stuff, so the NSA found a hack in Microsoft SMB, didn't tell Microsoft but exploited this, then NSA was hacked by the Russians then actually hacked Ukraine, then this hack actually, or this malware spread outside Ukraine, and the company Maersk actually estimates that they lost something like $250 million of NotPetya. This is now a while ago, but the total cost of this incident was $10 billion. Of course, that's one incident. And maybe if you multiply this by all the large companies, you can end up with 10 trillion, but of course, that's not what happened. And I don't know of any incident of this kind of scale in the last 10 years. Of course, there is warfare now. There is Stuxnet. There were incidents in Estonia and Georgia. There was the Russian war of aggression, where the energy systems were attacked. There was a solar winds supply chain attack. Then there was, at the beginning of the open conflict 4 years ago, there was the attack on Viasat that also affected some windmills of Germany. And then the telco systems were recently hacked by Seoul Typhoon, a Chinese actor. So it's a kind of hybrid war, can be part of regular war or can be just activity just below acts of war. It's a very interesting space now. So in this space, attacking is easier than defending, which is in general true for cybersecurity for now. Maybe it will change in the future, but I'm pessimistic there. You can do it remotely, you can do it large scale, or you can do it targeted. It's very difficult to find out who did this, because you can steal somebody else's malware and then do the attack. And of course, malware has traces of who did this. But if you then get attacked by the malware, you grab it and then you use it against somebody else, attribution becomes very hard. And so, of course, if you look at Stuxnet, but also the other things, there is now more and more physical impact as well. In the past, it was just espionage, intelligence collection, a bit low energy, low impact. But of course, Stuxnet is an example, but more and more it will also have physical impact on real people. And so it's not clear that deterrence will work, that if you do this to us, we'll do it to you. So it's in part done by private organizations. So you have these organizations, for example, in Russia, China, that are actually not government organizations. So there is plausible deniability. And I guess it affects individual citizens, so this is very challenging. And of course, part of it is economic driven, so you can use it, of course, to get diplomatic goals, or you can use it to influence political climate in a country, to create an atmosphere of uncertainty and panic, to manipulation of information. But of course, you can also use it for economic espionage. So the world is becoming much messier. It was very clear in the past that, you know, you don't violate borders in the physical world. And the only ones who would violate borders were spies. They would collect intelligence. And there was only one rule for spies. There is no legal regime for spies. There is only one rule: don't get caught. And if you get caught, you're on your own. But of course, now this is all blurring. And in the digital world, you can cross borders and take actions without actually physically going there. And you can have impact without having to send physical people there. So more or less, we're probably returning to a time of pirateering when governments were subsidizing other ships to attack the ships of other colonies, kind of a world of lawlessness. This is where we're going, where there is actually no rules, and you can change alliances to the one who pays you best, and that's maybe where we're going in the cyber world. And again, the big question for democratic societies is who will actually supervise all this? Right? I think police hacking, well, sometimes it's necessary. Intelligence forces, of course, they have to do some hacking. You may want to do an industrial espionage because you feel you need to do this. Espionage is always part of the game, spying. But in a democratic society, how do you do supervision of this? For example, we've seen that NSO group, they said, yeah, we have these tools to intercept WhatsApp, but we never use it against US or Israeli citizens. And then, of course, people showed evidence they had used it against US and Israeli citizens. And then it was evidence it was actually used against Netanyahu himself. Okay. And then NSO group was shamed and banned. And there was this is really bad, we're going to stop, we're going to ban your product. What happened a bit later, when nobody's watching, the Americans bought the company. Now it's a US company and now everything is allowed. Okay, this is how things work. So the question is there still democratic control over this? How can this be abused? Okay, so the last part, I want to say a few things about cryptography. So by the way, this course is very cryptography biased, which is not so surprising because our research group is cryptography biased. So you'll get today and tomorrow lots of basics of cryptography, state of the art. So we use it to encryption data to confidentiality. We have encrypting entities for anonymity. You'll hear about privacy technologies. You have data authentication and identification of entities. So you'll hear about this more this morning and later this afternoon. So in general, I think people still use this CIA triad, which is very 70s. And it sounds still very good, but I still have not seen good definitions of integrity. What is it then that you want to protect the integrity of? I also think that it's an oversimplification because we have many more complex interactions like authorization, non-repudiation of origin, contract signing, notarization. In fact, inference, right? If you have data and you do an analysis on this and you have conclusions, is this confidentiality? Is this integrity? Is this availability? So there is actually, my view on cryptography is you have complex interactions in the world and you want to move them to the digital world. That's what you want to do. And CNI is in good dimensions, but I think it's a bit of an oversimplification. You want to actually protect all the rights of all the entities in an appropriate way. That's really what you want to do. So we have encryption. I assume most of you are familiar with this. So more or less, you transform plain text into ciphertext under control of a key. And so you shift the problem of protecting data to keys. That's what you do. And later, after the break, you'll hear about algorithms on how to do this. You also have authentication, where you have, in principle, no secrecy, but you attach a short string as a function of a key and a message, and then the recipient recomputes this short string with the same key, and if it's the same, then the message is deemed to be authentic. So this is used for banking transactions. This is used also on the internet for all the packets, on Wi-Fi, so all communication networks. A MAC is being used. So in communication settings, you typically want both confidentiality and authenticity. In some settings, like if you're controlling a satellite or a plant, you may not want confidentiality because there's nothing to hide. If you send the command, open the valve, well, the valve opens, what is a secret, right? Or turn the satellite by 1 degree, well, everybody can see the satellite is turning. So there is no secrecy. So there are settings where you have authenticity of data, but not confidentiality. But historically, we had systems or solutions where people had confidentiality without authenticity. And that's a big mistake. So we should get rid of that. So either you have in communications or storage confidentiality and authenticity, or only authenticity. Confidentiality only, you can show with many cases that this makes no sense. But this is what people used to do in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And unfortunately, if you look in real systems, some people read textbooks of the 80s and then program them. And then you end up with confidentiality-only systems. Then a very big thing happened in 1975. So Diffie and Hellman found out you can use different keys for the operations. So you can encrypt with a public key and decrypt with a private key. So this is fantastic because now Alice and Bob don't have to meet and they can actually have secure communication. So this makes security available on open networks. Diffie and Hellman also found out you can have a similar dual operation where you have authenticity of data, where you sign with a private key and verify with a public key. And their vision was this would be for contracts. I still sign like every week a couple of contracts or documents with my identity card with a private key, but I guess I'm still an exception. But of course, signing, which I think Diffie and Hellman could not foresee, is today happens mostly for software integrity. Every update you get of your code is signed. And this is a very big application. Also authentication of internet services. So every time you go to a website, the server will prove who they are with a signature. And then, of course, we had a fantastic thing, which is Diffie-Hellman. I don't have time to explain it. I'll talk about it this afternoon, but I assume you're all familiar with this. So Diffie and Hellman could not implement public key encryption. They invented it, but they couldn't build it. They invented signatures, they couldn't build it. But what they invented is something even cooler, which is a Diffie-Hellman key agreement, where two parties who never have spoken agree on a secret anyway. And this is called key agreement. It's a weaker primitive than encryption because you can't choose the message, but you end up with a key. And it turns out that this is the core of internet protection today. And I'll explain to you this afternoon why Diffie-Hellman is so important today. So it's for forward secrecy. That's why it's widely used. And I guess also in the public key lecture, you will hear about it more. So I'll skip it for now. So more or less, cryptography systems were initially mechanical and used in the hands of a few. They moved to electromechanical systems, then electronic systems in the financial world. And then Diffie and Hellman came with public key. But in 1975, public key could not be implemented. So to the 80s, people couldn't implement it because it was too expensive. So Professor Rivest tried to build an RSA chip. He invented RSA, but he never managed to make it work. Because even 512-bit RSA was too complex for chips of the 80s. So only in the late 80s could we implement public key cryptography. And so the financial and telecom sector had some crypto devices, but when I started my PhD in 1987, we didn't have crypto devices in the university. If you wanted to see one, I had to go to a bank or to a company producing them because they were too expensive. Okay, we were working on them, but we didn't have them. And then a very big change happened around 1990. Computers became fast enough so you could actually do cryptography in software, which meant that the cost went down and also the governments could no longer control it. So the first big uses were, of course, GSM. This is in hardware, still in the phones, but then EMV. This is in credit cards, early 90s, and then SSL in the mid-90s. But there was still no mass adoption. By 2011, there were only 10 million SSL servers or TLS servers, and only half of them had a valid certificate chain. And then Snowden happened. And suddenly, Let's Encrypt was created, and we got today 700 million servers on the internet. So times 70 in a couple of years. We also got end-to-end messaging and much more end-to-end secure communications because of Snowden, I think. And then the latest thing is we have more post-quantum stuff. And also what we see, the first announcement last month, Instagram removed end-to-end encryption. So in fact, maybe this end-to-end encryption was only a temporary benefit for society, and governments decided that we should not have this. And so we got it for about 10 years, but maybe it will disappear again. Let's see what happens there. So we have about 75 billion devices in use. Well, this is devices, applications, and libraries. This is banking, access cards, IoT devices, update mechanisms, content protection, gaming. By the way, I forgot to mention this. The gaming industry is twice as big as the cybersecurity industry. That shows you what is important in society. Okay, 2 times as big, gaming. Okay, so we have lots of cryptography in use, but it's not there to protect Alice and Bob. It's there to protect industry and government against Alice and Bob. So all these stories in the textbooks of Alice and Bob, well, cryptography is mostly there to protect corporate interests. Because, for example, take an update. You have a software update. there's 5 things to your device. Maybe there is 2 you like or you need because of security updates. Maybe 3 you don't like. Well, you have no choice. You install the update or you don't. It's not your decision. You're not in control. Somebody else decides what happens to your device. And it's secure, yes, but not if you don't want a certain change. Well, tough. Then you can't get security updates either. We do have 90 billion devices, applications, libraries. By the way, there is overlap. So in total, I think there is something like 100 billion devices, applications, libraries doing cryptography. But here you see much more red. Like our phone system has cryptography to protect us, but it stops at the wireless part to make interception easier. And the Chinese exploited this in Salt Typhoon. You have the web system where there is also many flaws. We discuss that tomorrow. There is the IoT system. Again, there is many flaws and bugs in IoT. There is meet-in-the-middle attacks on these things. I guess the most secure things we have to protect ourselves are the encryption on those devices. It's pretty good. Governments get really upset about it. And I guess the messaging, at least, but for example, WhatsApp still has a backup in the cloud where the government or WhatsApp has access. So you really have to use Signal or so. But it's a big success, but still we could do much better and we should see much more green on this slide. Okay, so this is Let's Encrypt success, but we run a bit out of time. So about all these things, so there is about 100 billion. So because some, like IoT devices, have some stuff to protect the owner, like the update mechanism. I mean, the company, I mean. But of course, also the user. It has confidentiality of your data in principle. Although, if the internet is down, then your phone can't talk to your washing machine. That's very interesting. Why is that? It's a Bluetooth connection or Wi-Fi connection in my house, but if the internet is down, you can't talk to it. So there is some, is this really in my interest that if the internet is down, I can't talk to my washing machine? Would I have decided that option? I'm not sure. But so there is 70 billion of those devices using public key. And the problem there is quantum computing. You will hear about this more. But so in 94, Peter Shor shows that all modern public key cryptography can be broken with quantum computers. And then there were the first proof of concepts, 2001. The first conference was in Leuven 20 years ago. So there was a hot topic. And now we have the first standards, but also the first larger quantum computers that can do some useful stuff. So this is a very big challenge. We have to migrate those 70 billion devices to new cryptography. The good news is the standards are there. The bad news is it's going to be tough because it's 70 billion. Okay, I'll skip the details here because I'm running out of time, but you can look at this. So it's going to be a huge software migration project and also hardware. You can't do it all. Maybe you want to know which crypto you're using, but for some banks, that would take several years, so you can't wait for that. And you really have to find the high-risk applications that you have to migrate. It's going to be a 10-year project. TLS has in part migrated, but because there is no Diffie-Hellman equivalent, you don't actually really get what you had before. So it's very good, but not in the long term, we would need better solutions. Signatures turn out to be difficult. Although the standards are there, it turns out that rolling this out is hard. PKI is a nightmare. Okay, I'll talk about this tomorrow. And also TLS, if you want to do the authentication. So the encryption is okay, but authentication is tough. Platforms are challenging, hardware is challenging. And in the end, what people dream of is you can easily replace your cryptography. This was a dream already in SSL in 95, but I still think it's not something that's easy to reach because many cryptographic schemes have different properties. And so just replacing something by something else doesn't work, right? It's like, you can say, well, you have to change the tires on my car, but if the tires are 2 times bigger, your car will look a bit strange afterwards and may not drive properly. So this is a bit the problem we're facing, that you can't design a car that fits all kinds of wheel sizes. And that's crypto agility. So it's nice to think about it, but it may be very hard to achieve. And then finally, historically, this 100 billion applications devices focused on stored data and communicated data. The hot topic for a while already is, can we protect data while it's being processed? And the ultimate dream is, can you do machine learning on encrypted data? So that you actually have your data somewhere in the cloud encrypted. You can get recommendations for yourself, but nobody actually sees your data. That's kind of the ultimate dream. It sounds impossible, but it's not. So there is techniques like MPC and FHE, and you'll hear about this from Cyprien in the next days. Serial knowledge, you hear about this as well. So this is math. Of course, you can also use hardware if you prefer that, or you can use statistics and mathematics. And in practice, you need a combination because you want to protect your inputs, you want to protect your outputs, and then you also want to do verification. So this is kind of an attempt very quickly. I think Cyprien will go this in more detail. There's a range of techniques that you can use to protect this, and there is no silver bullet. You'll have to use a combination of those. The main bottleneck today is performance. And this is why one of the reasons why there is a hardware startup, Belfort, and they will give a talk on Thursday in the hardware track, where they try to build hardware chips to make FHE 10 to 50 times faster. So in MPC, you share data between multiple servers, and none of the servers has your secret data. They only have a share that gives no information, and you still can find the result. So this is, for example, was one of the products of Unbound. They built an HSM, a hardware security module, in software where there was no single server that held all the data. The disadvantage is a large communication overhead. In FHE, you encrypt your data in a server, say all your sensitive personal data, computations are being done, and you get the result, but nobody ever sees the data. It sounds like impossible, but you will hear about this from Cyprien in the next days. And there is also many systems where you can keep data local and do local computations, like federated learning or contact tracing. So in fact, this reflex of all our devices to put all our data in the cloud is not needed. So if, for example, the manufacturers of washing machines want to learn about your machine, they don't need to see the data of your machine. They could just collect limited data or statistical data that doesn't leak personal information, and you could aggregate this in the encrypted domain. So it's actually possible to have all the benefits of big data without having all the risks and having these big bubbles. Okay, so there's lots of cool applications like voting, currencies, privacy-preserving contact tracing, inference and training on encrypted data. So there's machine learning and AI and dark markets. This is a way of stock trading. So there's lots of cool stuff you can do, and I'm sure Cyprien will talk about this more. So I think to wrap up this talk, I think because of AI and because of the risks we're facing, I think we have to think more and more about our technology and whether we can use this or not, and how we should use this. And technology reflects values. And I think people in chemistry understood with biological weapons, chemical weapons, in biology, biological weapons. Then the physicists realized this in World War II with the nuclear weapons. And I think now, in these past years, computer scientists are realizing the same thing, that maybe AI and the systems we're building can be abused to harm humanity. And so I found a very nice blog, and the blog is interesting, but I like the slogan very much. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so even computer scientists should learn this, that it's not because you can collect all data and profile everything and watch everything all the time, maybe you shouldn't do this. And I think this is something which is kind of a bit shocking. And I show this slide in some computer science departments, people get angry with me. They say, who are you to decide what I should do? I said, no, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying you should ask this question. And maybe because you can do something, maybe you shouldn't do it. But it's for you to decide what you will do. So this is more like ethics. It has to be combined with, of course, what is legally allowed. The AI Act has quite some rules as well. And then technology combined. And so we should have principles in society like fairness, accountability, transparency, data minimization, which is actually in GDPR, privacy by design in GDPR. We should actually translate those principles into technology we roll out. And the problem is that technology is rolled out to maximize profit or to be the first to have the most powerful AI, and then people forget all those principles because there is a race happening. Okay, so time to wrap up. So it's about technology, people, and processes, although this week will be mostly about technology. You'll get to see more regulation. And I think if you're in this field, you'll have to probably read regulation or ask LLMs to summarize the regulation for you if you don't want to read regulation. I think ethics will become more important. You see this in AI. There is more international agreements. Also in cybersecurity, we need them. You see also in Europe a trend towards open software and hardware. to actually enforce sovereignty. So the Commission actually published a package last week on sovereignty package. And they have the part on open source is very well written. The question now is, are they going to give 1 billion to it, 5 billion, 20 billion, or 50 billion? Right? We know for defense they had 800 billion, that we know. But of course, if you give 1 billion for open source, it will be nice, not going to change anything. If you give 10 or 50 billion, that will make a difference. But I think in general, what society needs with these powerful tools is more transparency, especially for the powerful. I think I'm running out of time, so thank you very much for your attention. I will skip the overview of the course. I'll maybe do it just after the break, or we'll see. I'll talk to Tim, but you first deserved your break now, sorry for talking too long. I hope you had a great course. I'll give you some logistical information after the break or in the afternoon. Have a great course and enjoy your coffee break. Thank you.